Climate change will lead to rising sea level and extreme waves. To enhance the capability of the coastal areas in responding to climate change, the government plans to earmark funding in the next 5 years to take forward improvement projects and management measures for 26 low-lying or windy residential areas that are prone to high risk. We will also commence strategic studies on coastal management with a view to providing guidelines on planning and land use, as well as formulating the related long-term strategies and preventive measures. In addition, we will seek funding approval of about $8.4 billion this year for carrying out drainage improvement works in various districts to enhance the flood control capability. Quality living. In order that Hong Kong people and tourists can enjoy the diverse cultural heritage, the beauty of the Harbourfront, and the enhanced cultural, sports, and recreational facilities in Hong Kong, we will take forward our work in the following areas. Enhanced Harbourfront. The current term government has allocated $6.5 billion for developing new Harbourfront promenades and open space, as well as improving Harbourfront facilities. In 2021, a total of 13 new Harbourfront sites, including the harbour steps at Wan Chai Harbourfront, were opened, providing the public with more well-connected open space in close proximity to the Victoria Harbour and giving them a variety of water-friendly experience. In the coming year, we will continue to adopt the incremental approach in taking forward our plans to open the Hoi Sham Park extension in Kowloon City and the first section of the promenade under private development in the Kai Tak former runway area. This will extend the Victoria Harbour Promenade by 1 kilometer to a total length of 26 kilometers. Sports development. The government has been proactively promoting sports development with new resources allocation of more than $60 billion since 2017 for promoting sports in the community, supporting elite sports, and maintaining Hong Kong's status as a center for major international sports events, as well as for providing more sports and recreational facilities. These efforts encourage collaboration among different sectors of the community in fostering a strong sports culture. In 2019, the government injected $6 billion into the Elite Athletes Development Fund to subsidize the provision of comprehensive support to athletes through the Hong Kong Sports Institute. We also injected $250 million into the Hong Kong Athletes Fund in 2020 to encourage more athletes to commit to full-time training, as well as dual-track development in sports training and academic studies. I'm delighted to see that Hong Kong athletes achieve outstanding and encouraging results in international sports events last year, and I hope more young people in Hong Kong will pursue a career in sports, develop their potential, and bring glory to Hong Kong. Besides, we are pressing ahead with the Kai Tak Sports Park project, which is scheduled for completion by the end of next year. We are also proactively implementing the $20 billion 5-year plan for sports and recreational facilities and taking forward the construction and upgrading of community sports and recreational facilities. Meanwhile, we are progressively carrying out the 5-year plan to transform the public play spaces managed by the LCST. Cultural facilities. As announced in the 2018-19 budget, the government would set aside $20 billion for the improvement and development of cultural facilities in the following 10 years. We plan to seek funding approval this year to take forward the main works of a cultural center in Fanling, the construction of Yau Ma Tei Theatre Phase 2, as well as the main works of the leisure and cultural complex at Tin Yip Road, Tin Shui Wai Project Phase 1. Community Arts Scheme. Popularization of arts can enrich people's quality of life. Starting from the 2024 to 25 financial year, I will allocate $20 million per year to regularize the LCSD's Community Arts Scheme with the aim of providing more opportunities for members of the public to take part in arts and cultural activities, thereby promoting the integration of arts into our community. Over the past decade or so, we have allocated a total of $2.4 billion for the Revitalizing Historic Buildings Through Partnership Scheme, under which 19 historic building conservation projects have been launched so far. Through the financial assistance for maintenance scheme on built heritage, we have also assisted private owners in carrying out proper maintenance works for 71 historic buildings. Moreover, we are committed to enhancing public awareness of conservation of historic buildings and supporting relevant academic research. The Built Heritage Conservation Fund has subsidized many successful revitalization projects, such as Tile Heritage Hotel, Lui Seng Chun, and Yao Chung Yi Academy since its establishment. These revitalization projects have become local highlights, attracting many people to visit during leisure time. They also enhance Hong Kong's appeal as a tourist destination, and many of them have won international awards for heritage conservation. I propose to earmark an additional funding of $1 billion for the fund with a view to further promoting the conservation of heritage and historic buildings, caring and inclusion. We will continue to strengthen community and residential care services as well as social work services to support the elderly, persons with disabilities, and children, involving an additional annual expenditure of over $1.9 billion. On residential care services, we will regularize 3 pilot schemes, namely the pilot scheme on multidisciplinary outreaching support teams for the elderly, the pilot scheme on residential care service voucher for the elderly, and the pilot scheme on professional outreaching teams for private residential care homes for persons with disabilities. We will also allocate additional resources to upgrade the standard of EA2 homes under the enhanced birthplace scheme. On community care services, we will regularize the pilot scheme on home care and support for elderly persons with mild impairment and the speech therapy service of the enhanced home and community care services so as to help the elderly in need age in place. On the provision of additional welfare facilities, we will set up 7 contract residential care homes in the multi-welfare services complex, which is near completion at Kutong North NDA, as well as a new contract residential care home under the development project at Queens Hill in Fanling. In addition, a neighborhood elderly center, a special child care center, and an early education and training center will also be set up in Area 54, Tuen Mun, to provide community support and training services for the elderly, carers of elderly persons and children with special needs in the area. We will also regularize the pilot scheme on social work service for pre-primary institutions to facilitate early identification of and provision of assistance to pre-primary children and their families with welfare needs. Moreover, persons with disabilities receiving subsidized residential care and community rehabilitation services will be provided with soft meals from October this year onwards to cater for the needs of users with a swallowing problem. Neighborhood Support Child Care Project. Under the Neighborhood Support Child Care Project launched in 2008, service operators recruit child carers to provide families in their neighborhood with flexible day child care services at home as a way to foster the spirit of mutual help in the community. To better meet the keen demand for day child care services, the government will review the implementation mode and effectiveness of the project, including the need for home-based child carers to undergo certified training and the level of their pay, with a view to enhancing service quality as well as attracting more people to become home-based child carers. The review is expected to be completed by mid-2023.
Public finance. The current term government has all along been adhering to the principles of exercising fiscal prudence, keeping expenditure within the limits of revenue, and committing resources as and when justified and needed in public finance management. We have also strived to enhance the transparency of public finance. Thanks to years of economic development and the hard work of our people, the fiscal reserve stood at about $950 billion when this term of the government took office, and subsequently reached a record high of $1.17 trillion in year 2018-19. The ample fiscal reserves have enabled the government to allocate additional resources in a prompt and decisive manner to defuse crisis over the past 2 years, including setting up the AEF with an injection of about $200 billion in total, and implementing counter-cyclical measures on a massive scale to relieve people's hardship and stabilize the economy. Though consolidated deficits were recorded from 2019 to 2020 to 21 as a result, the positive impacts of the above initiatives, along with our solid foundation built on the principle of one country, two systems, have turned the consolidated deficit projected in the original estimates into a consolidated surplus projected in the revised estimates for this financial year. Our fiscal reserves are estimated to stand at about $940 billion at the end of the current term of the government, and will gradually rebound to over $1 trillion. Equivalent to 16 months of government expenditure during the 5-year period in the medium-range forecast. On enhancing the transparency of public finance, I have brought back the housing reserve to the fiscal reserves since 2019 to 20, and also announced last year that the investment return of the future fund would be progressively reflected in the operating account. These measures will allow one to have a full grasp of the government's fiscal strength and help maintain our financial stability. Striving to maintain healthy public finances. To address social aspirations and strive for service enhancement, the current term government has significantly increased the recurrent expenditure on social welfare, healthcare and education. Based on the revised estimates for the current financial year, the overall cumulative increase in the recurrent expenditure in these three areas will exceed 40%, or close to $85 billion in dollar terms. In view of the very substantial increase in the recurrent expenditure from $361.8 billion in year 2017-18 to over $510 billion in the original estimates for this year, I emphasized last year that government expenditure should enter a consolidation period. I also announced an expenditure reduction program, under which government departments were required to cut recurrent expenditure by 1% without affecting livelihood-related spending. Given the lasting effects of the recurrent expenditure reduction, we will not roll out any further expenditure reduction program this year. Otherwise, the cumulative impact may disrupt developmental operations and in turn affect the delivery of public services. We will, however, continue to examine carefully any new initiatives that will incur recurrent expenditure and strictly control the growth of the civil service, so as to ensure that our long-term financial commitments are commensurate with the increase in our revenue. The current time government actively promotes the government green bond program. Given that green bonds are issued to finance certified green projects and our commitments not to use the proceeds for meeting operating expenditure, they are widely accepted by investors. The issuance of green bonds will not undermine our fiscal discipline, but can relieve the government's fiscal pressure arising from the need to meet capital expenditure with existing resources, and hence further reinforce the confidence in our public finances. Increasing revenue. Hong Kong is an open economy with a relatively narrow tax base. Our revenue is susceptible to changes in the economic environment. To maintain healthy public finances, we follow the principle of keeping expenditure within the limits of revenue to ensure that the growth of expenditure is commensurate with economic growth. We also need to maintain the development and vibrancy of Hong Kong's economy and identify new areas of growth with a view to increasing revenue. Our simple and low tax regime, one of the cornerstones of our success in maintaining Hong Kong's competitiveness, is of utmost importance in bolstering our competitive edge. It is also closely related to our economy and people's livelihood. On the other hand, owing to the implementation of various policy objectives, enhancement of services, and an increase in investments in various areas of the community pursued by the current term of the government, public expenditure will remain at a relatively higher level. Our anti-epidemic efforts and the relief measures implemented in the past 2 years have also incurred additional expenditure. Given that government's revenue should be commensurate with its expenditure, we need to implement measures to increase revenue without affecting people's livelihood, so that we can broaden our revenue sources while maintaining our policy of low tax rates in Hong Kong. In last year's budget, I proposed to raise the rate of stamp duty on stock transfers as a measure to help increase government's revenue in the short run. However, with the outbreak of the fifth wave of the epidemic, businesses and individuals are generally under considerable financial pressure. Having regard to the current economic situation, I believe that this is still not the appropriate time to revise the rates of profits tax and salaries tax, which are major sources of revenue. We anticipate that a deficit will still be recorded in year 2022-23. In the medium term, with the implementation in 2023 of the international tax reform proposals drawn up by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, the introduction of a global minimum tax rate may help increase revenue from profits tax. I also propose to introduce a progressive rating system for domestic properties to reflect the affordable users pay principle. I will elaborate on these two measures in the latter part of the budget. Taking into account these new revenue streams, we expect that the government will start to achieve fiscal balance beginning from year 2023-24. In the long run, there will still be challenges in alleviating the pressure on public expenditure in the face of an aging population. The government will continue to explore different ways to broaden revenue sources and will initiate in-depth discussions in due course to forge a consensus on how to sustain healthy public finances to meet the development needs of our economy and society. Rating system. Revenue from rates accounts for about 3 to 4% of total government revenue. Last year, I announced in my budget a review of the rating system. Upon review, I propose to revise the rating system as follows. A. granting rates concession in a more targeted manner. The government will continue to consider on an annual basis whether to provide rates concession in the light of the prevailing circumstances to allow flexibility for the measure. In addition, in view of the public concern over the multiple rates concession received by owners with multiple domestic properties under the current rates concession mechanism, we propose that for future rates concession for domestic properties, only those eligible owners who are natural persons can apply for rates concession for one domestic property under their name. Taking the rates concession ceiling of year 2022-23 as a reference, the new arrangement can save around $3.1 billion for the government when a one-off rates concession is implemented in the future. And B, introducing a progressive rating system for domestic properties. For domestic properties with rateable value of $550,000 or below, it is proposed that rates be charged at the present level of 5% of the rateable value. For domestic properties with rateable value over $550,000, it is proposed that rates be charged at 5% of the rateable value on the first $550,000 and at 8% of the rateable value on the next $250,000, and then at 12% on rateable value exceeding $800,000. This can better reflect the affordable users pay principle. It is expected that about 42,000 domestic properties will be affected, accounting for around 2% of the total number of private domestic properties, with an increase of about $760 million in government revenue each year. The above revisions to the rating system will involve significant modifications on the IT system of the Rating and Valuation Department. The government will implement the above revision proposals in phases. The proposal regarding rates concession for domestic properties will be rolled out in the first phase in year 2023-24, whereas the proposed progressive rating system for domestic properties will be introduced in the second phase in year 2024 and 25. The government will in due course consult the electoral panel on financial affairs on the outcome of the rating system review, the details and the implementation timetable of the proposals. New international tax standards. Last year, Hong Kong, together with more than 130 jurisdictions across the globe, pledged to implement the international tax reform proposals drawn up by the OECD to address base erosion and profit shifting, abbreviated as BEPS 2.0. As the global minimum effective tax rate under BEPS 2.0 only targets large multinational enterprise, or MNE, groups with global turnover of at least 750 million euros, it will not affect local SMEs. The government has been exchanging views with the affected MNEs on matters relating to the implementation of BEPS 2.0 and reaffirmed that we would preserve the advantages of Hong Kong's tax regime in terms of its simplicity, certainty and transparency, maintain the territorial source principle of taxation, as well as minimize the compliance burden on MNEs when implementing BEPS 2.0. The government will maintain communication with the relevant MNEs to enable them to familiarize with the new tax rules as soon as possible. We plan to submit a legislative proposal to the electoral in the second half of this year to implement the global minimum tax rate and other relevant requirements in accordance with the international consensus. At the same time, we will consider introducing a domestic minimum top-up tax with regard to the aforesaid MNEs, starting from the year of assessment 2024-25, to ensure that the effective tax rates reach the global minimum effective tax rate of 15%, so as to safeguard Hong Kong's taxing rights. Based on our rough estimates, the domestic minimum top-up tax will involve an amount of about 15 billion Hong Kong dollars per year. Revised estimates for year 2021-22. The 2021-22 revised estimates on government's revenue is $682.7 billion, higher than the original estimates by 15.5% or $91.8 billion. This is mainly because revenues from land premium and profits tax are higher than the estimates by $43.5 billion and $32.4 billion, respectively. As for government expenditure, the revised estimate is $699 billion, 4% or $28.8 billion lower than the original estimate. This is mainly because the operating expenditure is $18.8 billion lower than the estimates. All in all, I forecast a surplus of $18.9 billion for year 2021-22. Fiscal reserves are expected to be $946.7 billion by the 31st of March this year. The civil service establishments recorded zero growth in this financial year. Departments have enhanced effectiveness and efficiency through prioritization, internal redeployment, and streamlining of work processes so that the workload can be handled even without increase in the civil service establishments. Estimates for year 2022-23. The major policy initiatives announced in the 2021 policy address involve an operating expenditure of about $10.4 billion and a capital expenditure of $4.7 billion. I will ensure that adequate resources are provided to fully support the launch of these initiatives. Total government revenue for year 2022-23 is estimated to be $715.9 billion. Earnings and profits tax is estimated to be $251.1 billion, increasing by 3.3% over the revised estimates for year 2021-22. Having regard to the land sale program and the land supply targets of year 2022-23, revenue from land premium is estimated to be $120 billion, decreasing by 15% compared with the revised estimates for 2021-22. Revenue from stamp duties is estimated to be $113 billion, increasing by 11.9% over the revised estimates for year 2021-22. Total government expenditure for year 2021-22 decreased by 14.4%. with its share in nominal GDP projected to drop from the peak of 30% in year 2020-21 to 24.4%. Total government expenditure for year 2022 and 23 will increase by 15.5% to $807.3 billion. Public expenditure will continue to account for about 24.9% of GDP on average during the 5-year period up to 2026 to 27 in the MRF. The recurrent expenditure of the current term government increased from $361.8 billion in year 2017 to 18 to $467.1 billion in year 2020 to 21, representing an increase of nearly 30%. Of this, expenditure on education, social welfare, and healthcare, which are the 3 policy areas closely related to people's livelihood, accounts for about 58%. In year 2022-23, the estimated recurrent expenditure on education, social welfare, and healthcare accounts for 60%, or $341.6 billion. Among these, the expenditure on healthcare has recorded the largest increase, representing more than double of that in year 2017-18. The government's target of zero growth in the civil service establishment will remain unchanged in year 2022-23, with the aim of ensuring the sustainability of public finances. It is expected that, as at the end of March 2023, there will be about 197,000 posts in the civil service establishment.
Medium-range forecast. The MRF projects, mainly from a macro perspective, the revenue and expansion as well as financial position of the government. From 2023 to 24 to 2026 to 27, a real economic growth rate of 3% per annum is adopted for the MRF. During the above period, the average annual capital works expenditure will exceed $100 billion, while the recurrent government expenditure is expected to drop by 1.8% in 2023 to 24. It will subsequently grow at a rate between 4.1% and 4.6% per annum. Regarding revenue from land premium, the forecast for 2023 to 24 continues to be based on the average proportion of revenue from land premium to GDP over the past 15 years, which is 3.8% of GDP. I also assume that the growth rate of revenue from profits tax and other taxes will correspond to the economic growth rate in the next few years. In addition, the MRF reflects the bringing back of the investment return of the Future Fund and the proceeds of the government green bond program. Based on the above assumptions and arrangements, I forecast a deficit in the operating account in 2022-23, which will turn into a surplus in 2023-24. There will be a surplus in the capital account in each of the 5 years during the MRF period, except for the estimated deficit in the operating account in 2022-23, which is mainly attributed to the one-off relief measures and anti-epidemic expenditure announced in this budget. There will be a surplus in the subsequent 4 years. The above forecast has not taken into account any tax rebate or relief measure that the government may implement over the coming 4 years. fiscal reserves are estimated at $1.065 trillion by the end of March 2027, representing 28.9% of GDP, or equivalent to 16 months of government expenditure. Mr. President, members, Hong Kong is currently experiencing its hardest time in the fight against the epidemic, and we are facing enormous challenges. Yet, we do have great strength and staunch support to ride out the storm. As long as we are united in taking decisive action with firm determination and unwavering confidence, we can surely win the battle against the epidemic, and our difficulties will eventually go away. After containing the epidemic, our next task will be to propel economic revival and accelerate medium to long-term development. To this end, we must stand high and stand firm to see clearly the big picture, better understand the long-term development trends, have a good grasp of the economic patterns, concentrate on the focal points, and map out long-term plans while remaining steadfast against fluctuations in the short term. Meanwhile, in the face of the profound changes worldwide unseen in a century, and the complex external environment, we must plan ahead and get well prepared to guard against risks so as to consolidate our development path and achievements. Since reunification, Hong Kong has weathered many storms with its economic and financial conditions remaining largely stable. Yet, amid the adversities, many issues have emerged, such as the imbalance in economic development, inadequate opportunities for young people to give full play to their strengths, as well as the distribution of economic gains, which have scope for improvement. Such issues need to be resolved step by step in the future. However, all these issues, which have implications for social harmony and stability in the long run, cannot be resolved in one stroke and have to be dealt with through the concerted efforts of our whole community. President, members, while every fascinating story is full of twists and turns, every success is spurred by the strength gained from overcoming setbacks. If there is one common factor, it may be that those who are striving to overcome setbacks and achieve success are all guided by firm determination and faith that they will be able to navigate through troubled waters. We deeply believe that Hong Kong can steer towards becoming a more equitable, just, caring, and inclusive society. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to the motherland, a landmark occasion that can usher in the start of a new chapter in Hong Kong's development. The implementation of the national security law and improvements to the electoral system have brought Hong Kong back on a track focusing on development. We are on course to embark on a new phase of good governance, which we all look forward to. Our country has always provided the strongest backing for Hong Kong. During the ups and downs of our development, our motherland has always given us staunch support, enabling us to write the next line in Hong Kong's success story. In the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, Hong Kong has a unique and irreplaceable role to play. On the back of our country's sustained and steady development, Hong Kong has a bright and promising future under one country, two systems. We share the same dream with our country. Together and united, we can build a better home with courage, wisdom, confidence, and action. Thank you. I now propose the question to you that the aforesaid bill be read the second time. In accordance with the rules of procedure, the second reading debate is adjourned and the bill is referred to the Finance Committee, Secretary for Labour and Welfare. President, I move the second reading of the Employment and Retirement Schemes legislation Offsetting Arrangement Amendment Bill 2022. The objective of the bill is to abolish the arrangement of using the accrued benefits of employers' mandatory contributions, or ERMC, under the Mandatory Provident Fund, or MPF, system to offset severance payments, SPE, and long-service payments, or LSP, under the Employment Ordinance. This is known as the offsetting arrangement. The bill seeks to give effect to the Chief Executive's enhanced proposal in her 2018 policy address to abolish the offsetting arrangement. Abolition of the offsetting arrangement is a significant measure that will benefit millions of employees and provide a better safeguard for them after retirement, while reinforcing the MPF's function as a key pillar of Hong Kong's retirement protection system. Given the far-reaching consequences in abolishing the offsetting arrangement, and that employers, employees, and different sectors held different views to the issue, the government has offered different proposals down the years to explore a practicable approach to abolish the offsetting arrangement. After years of extensive consultation and wholesale changes to the proposal, the government adopted the current proposal after sufficient consultation with employers and employees. The bill amends 8 pieces of ordinance or subsidiary legislation which provide for the offsetting arrangement or contain provisions that need to be consequently amended upon the abolition of the arrangement. I will now highlight the content of the bill. Abolition of the offsetting arrangement is closely tied to the supporting measure of introducing a designated savings account or DSA scheme and the eMPF platform being developed by the Mandatory Provident Fund Schemes Authority. The abolition arrangement will come into effect on an appointed date after the eMPF platform is fully implemented, or what is known as the transition date. After the transition date, employers can no longer use ERMC to offset the SP or LSP entitlement of an employee in respect of their employment starting from the transition date. Meanwhile, employers' voluntary contributions and the derived returns as well as gratuities based on employees' length of service can continue to be used to offset both pre- or post-transition portion of SP and LSP. These arrangements will remain unchanged. The bill proposes that the abolition will have no retrospective effect. If an employee was employed before the transition date, employers may continue to use the accrued benefits derived from their MPF contributions irrespective of whether the contributions are made before or after the transition date, or whether they are mandatory or voluntary, to offset an employee's SP and LSP entitlement before the transition date. This arrangement helps mitigate the risk of massive layoffs before the transition date. Otherwise, some employers might dismiss their employees, especially those with longer years of service, before the transition date in order to be able to use accrued benefits derived from the MPF mandatory contributions to offset SP or LSP. The current rate for calculating SP or LSP is 2/3 of the last monthly wages, subject to a maximum of $22.5 thousand for each year of service, and the maximum payment of SP or LSP is $390,000. The bill will not change the rate and maximum payment of SP or LSP. The bill proposes that the pre-transition portion of SP or LSP be calculated on the basis of the monthly wages immediately preceding the transition date and the years of service before the transition date, whereas the post-transition portion of SP or LSP would be calculated on the basis of the last monthly wages before the termination of employment and the years of service at that time. In comparison with using the last monthly wages before the termination of employment for calculating the total amount of SP or LSP, the above arrangement can guard against the risk of deliberate dismissals of employees by employers before the abolition takes effect. If an employee's employment period covers the transition date and the total SP or LSP exceeds $390,000, the bill proposes that the excess portion be deducted from the post-transition portion of the SP or LSP. This is to provide an incentive for employers to retain their staff and continue to employ them after the transition date and foster harmonious employments. Under the rare individual circumstances where an employee ends up worse off after abolition of the offsetting arrangement, the government will make up the difference through administrative means so that the employee will not receive less than what he or she would have been entitled to at present. To facilitate calculation of pre-transition portion of SP or LSP, employers will be required to keep wage and employment records of the employees covering the 12 months of the employee's employment immediately preceding the transition date. Abolition of the offsetting arrangement will also be applicable to occupational retirement schemes under the Occupational Retirement Schemes Ordinance, the two school provident funds under the Grant Schools Provident Fund rules and subsidized schools provident fund rules, and overseas occupational retirement schemes of employees from outside Hong Kong which are exempted from the MPF system. Since employers' contributions under these schemes are not differentiated into mandatory and voluntary contributions, the bill proposes to calculate and carve out a portion of non-offsettable benefits from ORS benefits by using a specific formula. These benefits, which are akin to ERMC, cannot be used to offset post-transition portion of SP or LSP. After deducting the amounts of non-offsettable benefits, the remaining amount can be used to offset pre- or post-transition portion of SP or LSP akin to ERVC. Abolition of the offsetting arrangement will not be applicable to employees who are currently not covered by the MPF system or other statutory retirement schemes because such employees are not affected by the offsetting arrangement. Their SP or LSP, if eligible, will continue to be calculated on the basis of the last monthly wages before the termination of employment in accordance with the existing practice. The bill also amends the Inland Revenue Ordinance to make it clear that SP and LSP paid in accordance with the Employment Ordinance is not chargeable to salaries tax, and makes consequential technical amendments to the Protection of Wages on Insolvency Ordinance in respect of provisions on the subrogation rights of the Protection of Wages on Insolvency Fund and calculation of ex gratia payment for SP in cases involving wage reduction. We consulted the Labour Advisory Board and LESCO panel on manpower over the bill. They expressed support in the proposal. To complement the abolition arrangement, the government will introduce two support measures, including a government subsidy scheme and a designated savings account scheme. As announced in the 2021 Policy Address Supplement, the enhanced government subsidy scheme will see a largely unchanged financial commitment and maintain a 25-year subsidy period to provide targeted assistance to MSMEs and help employers adapt to the policy change. We have met and explained the enhanced subsidy scheme to stakeholders, including the LESCO panel on manpower, LAB, employers associations, labor groups, and political parties. The business sector and society generally express support in the scheme. For the DSA scheme, we will first consult the main stakeholders on the operational details before introducing a bill into LESCO. The eMPF platform is expected to be fully implemented by 2025 at the earliest. By that time, we will concurrently launch the DSA scheme and abolish the offsetting arrangement. Members, the abolition arrangement has been discussed in the community for years, and the current proposal was the result of a consensus reached between employers and employees after extensive consultation and amendment suggestions. I call upon members to support the bill so that it could be passed as soon as possible to afford better retirement protection for employees in Hong Kong. Thank you, President. I now propose the question to you that the above bill be read the second time in accordance with the rules of procedure. The second reading debate is adjourned and the bill is referred to the House Committee. I now adjourn the Council. The Council will resume on Wednesday, 16th of March 2022 at 11 a.m.